One of the questions that we've always asked ourselves, and that the world has always asked, is the question of, how can someone know that God exists? Can anyone be certain that the idea of God is not just something that human beings invented? Can we actually prove God's existence by any mathematical formula? And if this is the case, how can we know what truly exists? And so we're going to try to explore that today and learn a few things around that. Now, although the Bible itself, when we read the Bible, although the Bible itself does not give specific arguments for God's existence, we, however, know that God has left his fingerprints in our world. And there are a number of arguments that have shown us that God has left his fingerprints in our world. And so, as I build my case, as we try to understand God's existence, I'm going to first of all provide 4 classic aspects or arguments about God's existence. The first one is what we call the teleological argument. Teleological argument. What does that mean? When people argue about God's existence, one of the ways that they argue about God's existence is the question of, if you look at the world and you look at the order of the world, you look at the structure of our world, you look at the design of our world, you and I have to at least come to the conclusion that there has to be some intelligent designer. Right? You look at how, how where the clouds are placed. You look at how the sun rises and sets and how that responds to even the moon. You look at how our world is structured and nothing is, and the world is not in chaos. We have to agree at least that what we observe in our world is not randomness. That there must be some kind of intelligence behind it. So that's what the teleological argument seeks to look at. Then there's also another aspect of the argument about God existence that is called the ontological argument. And the ontological argument tries to prove God's existence by defining God as the greatest or most perfect person. Now, if you and I have an idea of perfection, then there must be the one who is perfect. Because without an idea of the one who is perfect, how do you know what perfection is? And how do you strive towards perfection? And so that's what the ontological argument looks at. And then there's also what we call the moral argument. And the moral argument, which was described yesterday so perfectly by our General Overseer, Dr. Allotey, where he talks about the fact that every human being within us, we have an instinctive sense of what is right and wrong. So if you ask somebody, who taught you what is right and wrong, you can't tell the person. So Doc yesterday used the classic example of putting some kids on an island and not teaching them anything, and they will come to the conclusion that there is a creator. And he ends up talking about the fact that for you and I, our idea of justice and right and wrong and afterlife is all a proof of the moral argument. Because for you and I, instinctively, nobody even teaches us to some extent what is right and wrong. We have it instinctively within us. We can sense what is right and what is wrong. And so if we can sense instinctively what is right and what is wrong, then we can agree that we did not manufacture it ourselves. And if we did not manufacture it ourselves, there must be somebody who is the source of all morality, and that person is God. And then number 4 is what we call the cosmological argument, which I will spend my time to talk about today. And the cosmological argument, it comes from the word cosmos, which gives us the idea of the world. And that argument says that when we observe our world and we look at the facts of our universe, it supports the idea that God exists. God exists. Because the question that we ask ourselves is, how do we know that our world came into being? That's a very important question. How do we know that our world came into being? Is creation, the world that we have today, is it just a random act? And the question you ask is, if creation is only random and something just created the world, how do we explain the order that our world has today? Can a randomness create order? Can just something that is sporadic, out of nowhere, create the order that we have in our world today? And so I'm going to describe the cosmological argument in two ways. Number one, it is the idea that God exists because people can perceive the existence of the universe. The idea that God exists because people can perceive, they can see the existence of the universe. Number two, it is the fact that the universe exists is the proof that God exists. Because the universe exists, it's a proof that God exists. And I'm going to try to explain this argument in a very interesting way. And I'm going to use the example of a gentleman called Aristotle. Now, Aristotle is trying to understand, how can we know that our world exists? What caused existence? What is the source of our world? And anything that exists. He's trying to understand it. And I'm going to use the analogy of a building, of building a house. So think about trying to build a house. Now, if you try to build a house, there will be several things that will cause the existence of the building of the house. Number one, there's what we call the material cost. So all the wood, all the bricks, the windows, and so forth. Without these building materials, a house cannot exist. Do you agree with me? Then not only do we have that, number two, we have what we call the efficient cost. So although you have the materials, the wood, the nails, the blocks, the cement, if the workers don't come together to build it, it will not exist. So on one end, the materials is causing the building to show. On another end, workers have to ensure that these materials are used and put together. Otherwise, the building will not come together. So they will also call that they are also what? Causing the building. Then number three, there's also what we call the formal cost. There's the architect who has the blueprint, a design. Before you build, we can't just wake up and say we are building. There has to be a design. It is that design that the workers will follow and that will ensure that what we are building is intentional. So if you also ask the architect will also tell you that they are also causing the building. So on one end, the materials are there. Number two, there are the workers. And then number three, there's also the architect as well. But number four, there's also what we call the final cost. This house will be the result of the intentions of the homeowner to build precisely the house we want to build. Because the homeowner has exactly in mind what he or she wants to see. Without the intention of the homeowner, nothing will even start in the first place. So Aristotle therefore then begins to argue and says that when you see our world, somebody will say, oh, it's a big bang that caused the world. Scientists will claim that. Another person say, oh, our world is caused because, maybe, somebody was, human beings planted some seeds and, trees grew and plantation grew and vegetation grew. So it is the farmer or the human beings who caused the world to look like what it looked like. Aristotle said that all these people may have these ideas, but there is a final cause, because without God's intention, our world does not even exist in the first place. So he's trying to understand that everybody can claim that they caused the world to exist. But there is one who's without his intention, our world will not exist as well. And so the argument therefore here is that because our world is so connected that there has to be an on-course cause. Who triggers the first cause for us to have the world that we have today? there has to be an uncaused cause. If everything that exists in our world has a beginning, there has to be one who has no beginning to start a beginning. Because without him, there will be no beginning in the first place. And for that one to exist, that one must not have a beginning. Because if he has a beginning, then he was caused. And if he was caused, then who caused him? So at some points, for you and I, we have to agree that there has to be one who caused the world, but is not caused. The self-existing one. The one who has no beginning and no end. The one who has no time attached to him. And so if you look at Aristotle's argument, he's saying, if I have to summarize his argument, that we observe things to exist in what he calls causally connected sequences. Our everyday observation of our world is part of a larger connection. Let me give you an example. Do you know that the rising and setting of the sun affects the tides? Tidal waves. And you know that all that also affects the seasons in our world. And do you know that the seasons in our world also determines when we can also plant and when we can also harvest? So you see the connectedness of our world. He says when you see how our world is so connected, when we see that going on, we cannot just attribute that to randomness. There has to be some intention. There has to be some intention. And so from the observation of our world, nothing happens in isolation. There is cause and there is effect. But if there is cause and there is effect, then the one who triggers the effect that we see must himself be uncaused. And so, number two, Aristotle teaches us that there cannot be what we call in science an infinite regress. What is an infinite regress? Because people have always asked the question, if God created the world, then who created God? That's one question people always ask. Because if nothing just exists randomly, then who created God? But you and I have come to understand that although our world is created, there has to be a beginning, a first cause. Now, if God created the world, and we ask who created God, and we also ask the question, who created the one who created God? And we keep going on and on and on and on and on. But because we understand that there is a beginning, we understand that the beginning is not caused by itself. The one who caused it himself is uncaused. So you see, there's an initial cause, there's cause and effect, and there's a final effect as well. Then he tells us, number three, that the sequences of existence we see in our world today must be finite, must have a beginning. Must have a beginning. That's why scientists will tell us that you can trace the age of our universe because our universe has a beginning. But the one who caused the universe is ageless because he has no beginning. And because he exists in timeless existence. And so if we agree, therefore, that everything we see in our world today has a beginning, then there must be a first cause. And that first cause must be uncaused, must be eternal, and must be able to exist everywhere, must be unlimited. Must be unlimited. Very interesting argument. But not only does Aristotle give us this argument, there's another gentleman called William Lane Craig. He says that everything that begins to exist has the cause of its existence. If we agree that the universe began to exist, then we must also agree that the universe has a cause of its existence. Now, if the universe has a cause of its existence, then the universe cannot cause its own existence. And the reason why I'm saying this is because nowadays in our world, people pray. When they pray, they say, I'm praying to the universe. You are praying to something that has an existence. And if your faith is on something that was caused, then you and I are of all men most miserable. But if our faith is in the one who is on course but caused our world to come, then we have an understanding that our life is not miserable because we have a God who is not limited. Who is not limited. There's a Muslim philosopher called Hamza. Hamza even argues, he says, our universe is finite. He says finite things come from nothing. They cannot create themselves. They are created by something else. He makes a very interesting argument. But one of the things that we are trying to understand today is that if our world is created by the on-course cause, who is the on-course cause? That's a very important question. Who began everything? That's a very important question. Now, if the world is finite, the world is limited, the world is created, then that which created the world must have the following characteristics to pass for being on course. Number one, that which created the world must have no beginning and no end. Very important. Because if that which created the world has a beginning and an end, then it's caused. And if it is caused, then it is also like the universe. And if it is like the universe, then it cannot be God. So that which created the world must have no beginning, must have no end. Number two, that which created our world must not be temporal. That means that you cannot trace its existence from a particular beginning, a particular point. That is why you and I, we don't say happy birthday to God. Because he is not temporal. You can't locate his existence to a particular beginning. But you may ask me, what about Jesus Christ? Even Jesus in John 1, in the beginning was the Word. So when Mary gave birth to him, that was not his beginning. That was his earthly ministry. That was not his beginning. In the beginning was the Word. It's not temporal. Number three, the on-course cause is not dependent. God does not depend on us for love. Like Dr. Toby always says, like, as if, if you don't worship God, then he will say, hey, I'm moody today, oh, if not worship me. The on-course God is not dependent. He is God all by himself. Whether you believe or you don't believe, he is God. Whether you acknowledge or not, he is God. That is why God doesn't fight people when they are questioning his existence. He doesn't say, I'm going to strike them. Whether you argue in a university that he exists or not, he is God. Your argument does not validate his existence. Whether you choose to believe or choose not to believe, he remains God. The only thing that you may not benefit from it. He is not dependent. Number four, this character of the on-course cause is not material. It's not material. Because anything that is material or that is physical is limited by time and space. That is why you can stand somewhere and be praying in Kantamantu. And somebody can be in Brekum and be praying. And that same God can be hearing them at the same time. Because he is not material. The gods of this world must be moved from place to place. But the God that we serve is not contained in time and location. He even knows the number of hairs on your head. He can count them. Well, not me. I don't have hair in my head. But he knows the number of hairs on our head. He can count it. He is not limited. That is why when you pray, God does not have to travel to you to answer your prayer. Where you are, he's already there. And yet he's everywhere at the same time. He is not material. And not only that, he is not a material cause. He is not caused by anything physical. Nothing caused him. He just exists. He just exists. He's just there. We came to meet him. He's just there. He's not a material cause. Number 6, he's not subject to coercion. You can't coerce God. You can't bribe. Are you not happy that God cannot be coerced? Because if somebody can bribe God, then they can do you bad. But God that we serve is not subject to coercion. He is not subject to manipulation. You can do what he is. You can't move him. He does what he wants to do. He is self-sufficient. The God that we serve is not corporeal. He has no body. Nobody. That is why he can exist at the same time. He has no property other than his nature. That is why God cannot do anything outside of his nature. He cannot be less loving or more loving. He's love. He cannot be more merciful. He's merciful. He cannot be more magnified. He's big. When we say we are magnifying God before our own eyes. It's not as if we are making him bigger than he is. We are only seeing him bigger in our own eyes. That is the God that we serve. He has no differentiation. He has no parts. Nothing like that. So if we describe these characteristics, then we have to come to the conclusion that these characteristics sound like they are personal. And if they are personal, we have to at least agree that this uncursed course we are talking about must be the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible. And the scriptures have even given us some clues about it. If you look at the Jewish scriptures, for example, you look at the book of Psalms, Psalm 19, it says, the heavens declare the glory of God. What you see in the heavens is a declaration of God's glory. The skies are telling you what he has done. They proclaim his handiworks. It says, day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. Look at what he says, for example. In Job 38, verse 1 to 8. 1 to 18, I will not read it all, but very interesting statement. Look at what Job says. I like what he says. He says, then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? Who laid its foundation? God is asking Job a question because Job is questioning God. He's going through a difficult time. And he's saying, God, do you love me? And God says, when I built the world, where were you? Where were you? If I can do all this, why do you think your suffering can stop me from intervening? He says, where were you? When the Bible even says something like, go out and look at the birds of the air. They don't even toil, but they eat. Once in a while, go out and look at them. You will understand the magnificence of this God that we serve. Even Paul reminds us in Romans chapter 1, verse 19. Paul says that since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people don't have an excuse. Paul is saying that God is the source of everything. Human beings we don't have an excuse. He's the source of everything that we see. Even in the Quran, they confirm all this. They can't run away from that. That the God that we serve is the source of all these things. So what are we trying to say? The universe began to exist. Number one. Everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Everything. The universe has a cause of its existence. And so if the universe has a cause, then what caused the universe must be personal. Must be personal. And if what caused the universe is personal, then it must be God. Because sometimes scientists say, it's some explosion, some big bang, and that was it. There was nothing personal. Nobody was involved. How can some explosion just create this random world, this orderly world? How do you answer that question? How does an explosion just create the intentionality we find in our world? How? That I breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide. The plants need the carbon dioxide. You see how the world is, how everything is so structured, so intentional. Even look at your human system, how your digestive system works with your respiratory system. Just look at the intentionality. The person who created this world must have been involved. Must have been involved. It cannot be randomness. It cannot be randomness. Doesn't work that way. It's not possible. Therefore, there is a God. God is not a theory, my friends. He is a person. And his personalness is fully revealed in the person of Jesus Christ. So you may ask me, where does faith fit in all of this that I'm saying? It's not belief in God a matter of personal faith and not a matter of knowledge. Why do we need knowledge? Does human reasoning remove faith, for example? Does not God himself demand that we approach him trusting and believing, not questioning and reasoning? That is true. And there is bound to be much in life that does not even make sense to us if God is really in charge. But faith, my friends, must be based on solid footing for it to make sense. Just like you cannot place your trust on a stranger until you have met their character, their strength, their weaknesses. God also is giving us evidences of his reality. Evidences. And God is telling you and I, if I created the heavens, the earth, the galaxies, the world spinning on its axis, that if the earth was to move 1 foot close to the sun, it will melt. If it moves 1 foot away from the sun, it will freeze. God says, if I can do all that, what can't I do for you? What can't I do in your life? He says, if I can do, God says, I'm showing you these evidences because if I can do all these things, if I'm so intentional, you are not out of my hands. He has given us all these evidences to let us know that if you look at this world that astonishes us, that makes us surprised, that makes us overwhelmed, that we are still discovering things. He says, if I created that, then there is nothing about your life that I don't know about. And I pray that this afternoon's presentation will encourage somebody and encourage your faith to serve God, to believe him, to hold on, and to stand up everywhere and defend your faith. God bless you all.